G'day everyone and welcome to Tim Topham TV episode 8 where we're talking about Autism Spectrum Disorder with my very special guest Thembi Shears. But before we start, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, which is Music Teachers Helper, which is online scheduling and billing software designed by music teachers for music teachers, and it's the software that I use to streamline my studio. If you're a bit of a technophobe, then don't fear. One of the best things about Music Teachers Helper is that each time you go to a new menu item, you can watch a quick tutorial video about how to do everything, and you can read handy tips on each page to get you started in no time. Do you want to find out how easy it is? Then head to www.musicteachershelper.com/Tim, T-I-M, register for a free 30-day trial, and if you choose to continue your access, you'll get 20% off for your first month. So my guest today, Thembi Shears, is a piano teacher based in Brisbane, Queensland. She graduated from QUT, that's the Queensland University of Technology, in 2010 with first class honours Bachelor of Education Primary, specialising in inclusive education. As well as teaching, she currently works with Hal Leonard Australia as a brand ambassador for the Faber Piano Adventure Series, having undertaken private training with Randall Faber in 2013. She presents at conferences and workshops around the country to train other teachers using this method and on a whole lot of other different topics. And I'm very excited that she joins us now from sunny Queensland. Thembi, welcome.
Thanks, Tim. Nice to be here.
Is it in fact sunny out there today?
It is sunny, but it's freezing for Brisbane. I'm sure we're complaining, but
You're giving away all the secrets. Everyone thinks Brisbane is just the place to be, don't they?
Oh, well, it just as soon as it drops below 25, we all panic. So it's not cold. It's just cold.
As soon as you've got to put a jumper on. It's freezing down here in Melbourne. It's about 8 degrees today. Well, that's freezing for Melbourne. So look, let's get started. Did I cover most of the things about you in the intro, or is there any other little bits of information you'd like to give us before we get started about sort of your background or how you came into doing what you're doing?
I think you've covered most of it. I sort of fell into teaching accidentally, actually. I wanted to study medicine and started teaching piano part-time, and then decided that a teaching degree was the way to go.
Right, yes.
Gave it a switch. And the studies in inclusive education just came up after doing one subject at uni that I really loved, and I decided to work out how to pursue that by taking other courses.
And so what did inclusive education, what did that actually, what did that involve?
Well, we refer to inclusion as like students with learning difficulties and learning disorders and medical conditions such as like cerebral palsy and spina bifida that once would have been sent into, what we call like the special schools.
Yep.
The idea that they're in mainstream schooling is the concept of inclusion. So, I mean, we studied a range of like learning disorders such as dyslexia or medical conditions such as cerebral palsy, and working out how they affect children in the school.
Okay.
So how teachers can work with those, individual needs.
Yeah. There seems to be a move these days to include students more and more in mainstream schooling, doesn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really good for that social inclusion. I mean, certain health issues that a child might have or learning problems don't mean that they're not going to function in everyday society, and therefore, like, mainstream schooling is the best.
Yeah.
For them.
Up to a point, I guess. There's probably a cut-off somewhere where...
Of course, there are students that mainstream schooling's not going to work for them, and they are much better suited. They're going to get much better help and tuition that suits their learning needs in a more specialised environment. But it's really good that we don't have a really strong segregation now between like the mainstream schooling and children that, can totally access it, but it just wasn't available to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's get into today's topic, which is teaching students, particularly with Autism Spectrum Disorder, and I guess ADHD. And I know they're quite different, but I guess that perhaps some of the behaviour that comes out of the two might cross over. And so I'm not sure if we can actually talk about both together, or we should just focus on one. But actually, before we start, I want to make sure I'm getting my language use right.
Yep.
So we definitely, maybe only 5 years ago, we would talk about kids with Asperger's.
Yep.
Or kids on the spectrum and things like that. Like, what should we be saying these days?
Well, the term Asperger's has been removed from the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. It's the psychiatrist's book of all the disorders and mental conditions that exist. And in the fifth revision of that, it was only end of 2012.
Okay.
They removed the term Asperger's, and they're now referring to it within the blanket term of autism spectrum disorder.
Okay.
So instead of separating autism and Asperger's, we're covering them under the same spectrum. They're pretty adamant about the idea that the diagnosis of Asperger's hasn't disappeared. It's just the term. So that, they're not saying that that condition doesn't exist or disorder, however we want to call it, just that we've renamed it as they're saying the overlap between the two could obviously be a little bit too much sometimes to really separate them.
Sure.
But on that note, my partner works at a hospital, in a big teaching hospital in Brisbane, and he's currently doing a term in mental health, and the psychiatrists there haven't read the DSM-5.
Oh, right.
So some of the terms obviously still get used, and I'm sure the updates have money-making potential.
I'm glad to know that the Tim Top on TV podcast is at the forefront
Absolutely.
of mental health research. That's great.
So yeah, autism spectrum disorder is the correct term. I think an important thing when we're talking about language is to use what we call person-first language. Right. So if you're talking about a student that has autism spectrum disorder, you're talking about this student has ASD as opposed to this student is autistic.
Okay.
So defining the student by whatever kind of disorder they happen to have, because it's not what defines them as a person, obviously. You can think about how, children with leukemia will say, oh, Tim has leukemia, not Tim is cancerous.
Sure, yeah.
Think about it that way, it makes more sense.
Absolutely, yeah. And perhaps that's why we're moving away from talking about kids being on a spectrum, perhaps.
You
do still hear that, I guess.
Yeah, any kind of labeling like that is often you're being too vague and sort of boxing the student in. And as an educator, if you're working with a child, it's much better to be referring to that child's specific needs. So instead of saying, oh, they're low functioning, it would be better to say, oh, they have problems with verbalizing their thoughts or their needs. They have problems with self-care. They have excellent memory with patterns, to be more specific and not just sort of putting them somewhere on a spectrum. Of course, the term on the spectrum is used.
Yes.
It's not problematic. It's more that it would be better to refer to that child's individual needs than to sort of bunch them up somewhere.
Okay. And is the term special needs still relevant to kind of describe a number of these kind of things and learning difficulties in general?
It's definitely used, but special needs has quite negative connotations within the disability rights movement. The idea being that it's quite segregating. You're referring to people by, how do I say it? Like they have special needs is sort of alienating them from the mainstream sort of community. So I think the term special is often seen as quite a negative thing or a sort of a euphemism for programs and activities that are not up to par in comparison to what their, typical bodied peers could do and are available to them. So we tend to steer away from the term. I'm sure it's in use, but it's not really appreciated.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think it's so important to get this kind of language clarified because, not only does it change and has it changed recently, but, we want to make sure we're handling these students and their parents and families sensitively, I think.
Absolutely. And I mean, people often just don't think about the language that they use, and it's, not trying to be rude or make a point. It's just, frequent usage becomes a habit. So we can think about that a little bit more carefully. Can be more positive for people.
And am I right in thinking that students with Asperger's, even though we're not quite calling it that, are at kind of at the lesser end of the autism spectrum? Is that right?
We normally refer to it as the higher end of the spectrum. So that if we were thinking about what Asperger's, used to be called, the term is still used a lot, especially by people with Asperger's who associate themselves. That's part of their identity, and they don't want to lose it, so they're quite keen to keep it. And just parents and teachers who I actually find it more helpful, but obviously it's not correct to use that. I mean, students that have been diagnosed with that in the past, and now you've got to change the language that you're using. Definitely the term still gets thrown around.
Yeah.
So those students we think of as having above average intelligence usually. Definitely they're not, definitely don't have an intellectual impairment. And it's more to do with their social skills, communication skills, and sensory sensitivity and liking of routine. But their intelligence is usually quite high.
Okay.
They don't have problems with self-care, or they might have issues with speech, but they definitely are verbal.
Yeah, sure.
So to speak.
So if we use the kind of correct term, we would say they're on the autism spectrum, and they're high on the autism spectrum. They're high functioning. Is that
yes,
right?
So we'd say that they have autism spectrum disorder.
Okay.
But we can refer to them as high functioning.
Okay. And so, and as... Sorry, no, go on.
It's a bit tricky anytime you're trying to be, what you think of as politically correct, but also get a good frame of reference for what that student needs.
Yeah. And look, I imagine that the best people to ask about this kind of thing is the parents anyway, because they're going to be so connected with it. And I certainly know from experience that some parents will have their child diagnosed as having ASD, but won't tell their children that that's what they've got. I've experienced that before. So sometimes I think we have to be careful with how, and I never mention it to this student, but with the parents, I got some tactics and that sort of thing about how to approach his teaching.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You don't want to step on anyone's toes. If they're, especially if the child's young, then they often don't need to be informed that they're different to all of their friends in that way, and see themselves in a sort of negative light, or view that something's wrong with them. So I'm sure that would come up in a lot of piano teachers. As you've said, the parents might not have told the child, so you don't want to be bringing that up.
No, that's exactly right. That could be very awkward.
That's an awkward question.
Now, we did mention right at the start ADHD. Now, and this is a little bit different. So can you tell us about ADHD and if there's any connection, or is this completely separate?
Completely separate. I just think it's good to talk about, because as piano teachers, the most likely, I find the sort of highest recurring conditions, probably not the right word to use, but coming into my studio is students that have been diagnosed with ADHD or autism spectrum disorder. So I think they're the two most useful things to know about, probably, as piano teachers, as the most frequent things you're going to need to know about. Definitely completely separate. So it's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and it's a behavioural disorder rather than a developmental disorder. So it's categorised by three things: inattention, obviously, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. Okay. So within each of those, we've got inattention, obviously to do with poor concentration, ability to sustain concentration or attention for a long time, forgetfulness, disorganization come into that. And then with impulsivity, blurting things out, not thinking before they speak, being a little bit accident prone quite often, not thinking things through. And then hyperactivity, fidgeting, not being able to sit still, often talking too much. And then they consider that to be three types of ADHD. So the combined type, where the criteria for both inattention and the hyperactivity, impulsivity part is combined, where the criteria for both of those things are met in the past 6 months. So the child is considered to have combined type ADHD. So they've got problems with inattention and the impulsivity, hyperactivity. Then there can be the single type, so inattentive type, where it's a little bit hard now with the label just being ADHD. It used to be ADD without the hyperactivity part for students whose main problem was with inattention. So you could get a child diagnosed with ADHD, but inattentive type means they don't have a hyperactivity characteristic to their behaviour. Okay. So problems are really just with inattention, organisation, forgetfulness, that sort of thing. Okay. Not the hyperactivity side. Right. But the term used now is just ADHD, not ADD. Okay. So it can be a little bit confusing or sort of misinterpreted. And then students can have the hyperactivity, impulsivity type ADHD, where the characteristics for those things are being met, the criteria, and not for inattention. Okay. So the child's specific needs can vary. They might have problems with both or just one or the other.
So just because a student is bounding around and can't seem to concentrate doesn't mean that
Doesn't mean they have ADHD. No. There's a long process of diagnosis, and the criteria there are set out criteria for each of those, inattention, impulsivity, hyperactivity characteristics, and those need to be met within the last 6 months. But we'll talk about, the diagnostic process a bit later.
That would be great.
It's definitely not just every child that has a lot of energy has ADHD.
Well, I'm thinking there's probably a lot of teachers going, I know a lot of boys in my studio who can't sit still and etc. And look, I look at some of my teenagers as well, and in fact, I tick off some of those labels.
Oh, me too. I'm terrible. I can't sit still.
Accident prone. My partner would laugh wholeheartedly at that, because I'm definitely accident prone.
I'm on that one.
Okay, so while I know you're not a doctor, can you give us an overview? Actually, we might as well just cover that kind of diagnosis. Do you know how these things diagnosed in a general sense, without going too?
Yeah, so just in general, the parents and the child would have a meeting with their GP. And the GP will give them a referral to either a pediatrician or a pediatric psychologist or psychiatrist, who will then initiate. It's quite a complex process of assessment. Obviously, I'm not a doctor. I don't know the full details, and I'm sure most piano teachers, we don't need to know the full details of diagnosis, but it's a complex process where they they observe the child in various scenarios. They discuss with the parents, teachers or preschool or daycare, staff that they've been working with. They'll collect information in all aspects of the child's life and their behavioural sort of history as well, like their past behaviours and development. So it's not a quick test. It's a process of gathering information and considering all the different factors.
And it would take some time by the sounds of
things.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. And I mean, it might take even a while from the GP getting a referral to a specialist. It might take a while to get in to see that specialist before you even begin the process. So
okay.
Some families might be going through that process.
Yeah. And I guess I'd hope that parents would let piano teachers know when these things are happening.
Yes, I hope so.
yeah, it would be nice to think that anyway. So let's talk about the indicators that a student. Let's say you've just started a new student, and the parents haven't said anything to you about any behavioural or developmental issues.
Yeah.
Let's talk ASD, so Autism Spectrum Disorder. How might students present? I know it's a spectrum, so there's going to be different things, but are there some kind of key things that these students tend to do that a piano teacher would go, maybe that's what's happening?
I think so, especially if you're looking at the higher functioning end, if everyone's happy for us to call it that for now. Mm-hmm. I mean, students that are on the other end of the spectrum, their parents are going to tell you, or it's going to be very evident if the student is nonverbal, for example. So if we're looking at that sort of higher end, often repetitive movements. You might have seen sort of students that, it's that sort of really ancient idea of rocking back and forth, but there are lots of little movements like that are self-soothing behaviours. So it might be repetitive finger movements, like moving quickly, or hand flapping, like in that way. Or even like sucking on the collar of a shirt. One of my little boy students sucks the collar of his school t-shirt constantly, and it's just a sort of helping him regulate his environment. That's what that sort of behaviour is. So those things are quite noticeable, I find. And really restricted interests. So a student that has a really intense focus on one topic, like trains, for example. I have a cousin with autism spectrum disorder, and he's 23 now, and he still watches Thomas the Tank Engine videos hour after hour, steam trains, does puzzles, plays games, anything to do with that, and he's just so happy. I once taught a 14-year-old boy with Asperger's back when the term was used, and his focus was classical music, so that was quite wonderful for me.
Perfect.
Not too much of a problem.
Absolutely.
To work with. So that really intense focus of a topic. And a lack of understanding of social skills can be quite evident. So first of all, not liking eye contact, sorry, can be quite common. And on that note, don't force the child to make eye contact. It doesn't help anyone, and it's a bit awkward, quite awkward and uncomfortable for them.
Yes.
Yeah, so not understanding facial expressions or gestures or body language that you might make, not understanding figurative speech, so taking things literally if something's got an implied meaning or a sort of sarcastic meaning.
Yep.
Really like misinterpreting what you've said can be quite a clue for teachers, because that's sort of uncommon, especially in older students, that you would expect to know those phrases and what they mean.
Like grab a chair or something.
Yeah.
It won't mean sit down. It'll mean grab hold of a chair and stand there, sort of thing. Yeah.
When I was teaching in a classroom, I think it was a grade 2 class, and I told one of the girls to wait a minute because I was just marking someone else's work, and I swear it was 60 seconds, and she was asking me the same question back right up to the face. And I was still working with the other boy, and just really literal interpretations. And sort of not understanding those social conventions of how close to stand to someone when you're talking to them. So stand really close, speaking very continually, like not really understanding the flow of conversation, and more very one-sided speech. They can come across as quite egocentric, which is not true. It's just that they don't understand how conversation is working. So the speech might seem quite one-sided. And often on one of those topics a student is particularly interested in, they will happily speak to you for like 4 hours if you don't interrupt them about the topic. So little things like that. I think I wrote a few things down. Heightened sensory sensitivity. So this is a big thing to consider with students with ASD, is being sensitive to various sensory things. It could be touch, it could be noise, it could be light, it could be colour, it could be smell, and feeling very overloaded by that information. So what we might think of as quite bright could mean that child feels like they just need to shut down. I can't. It's just
okay.
Or noise, like the noise of a washing machine on in the background can mean a child can't focus, can't concentrate, or reactions to colours or smells, like students in classrooms coming in and absolutely having what teachers would consider a meltdown, but it's because the teacher's wearing an orange jumper and they can't stand the colour orange.
Right.
And it's not misbehaviour. It's not being deliberately naughty. It's just an inability to cope with the environment. Certain things. So that's a really big one to talk to parents about, because they're going to know that child inside out. And it's completely down to the child. It could be any number of sensitivities to things, and you're only going to know by asking. And you can avoid a lot of discomfort for the child by not wearing that colour, or not wearing aftershave or perfume that day, or drawing the blinds, for example. It can be pretty simple. But it's a pretty big indicator if your child has a big reaction to something that you wouldn't consider
insignificant.
Would affect them.
Yeah. I've taught a few higher functioning ASD students, and I can remember one particularly who would just he'd be very focused for a while, and then his eyes would just start wandering around. And it could so easily be a teacher could just say look at me when I'm speaking and that sort of thing, and it's not the way to do it, is it? Because he's not misbehaving. It's just
absolutely.
I just had to go, all right, back to the music. Here we go. Sort of thing.
And they could actually be listening to you and taking it all in as well.
It's just a different way that they process information.
Processing.
Yeah.
And yes, it's just really good to remember that most behaviour is not deliberately naughty. It's either misunderstanding what you've told them, or an instruction that you've given that might have been too vague, or sort of had implied meaning, or was a figure of speech, or just reacting in a different way to the environment, to a typical child.
And I was going to ask, these kind of we call them symptoms, I know signs probably of their behaviour. Do they change as they get older, or perhaps what you said about your cousin, perhaps they don't? I don't know. Will teenage students with high functioning ASD behave perhaps differently to really young children, or is it just dependent on the individual?
I think a lot of the time as the children get older, they do understand their own sort of characteristics and personality things and things that they don't cope with well, and they're much more able to self-regulate and really understand, a lot of the sort of teenagers and adults that when the DSM-5 came in and the term Asperger's was removed were really upset because they consider themselves, a lot of them call themselves Aspies, and it's part of their identity. And I mean, that's something that they hold on quite dearly, that they've realised, I'm not strange. It's actually I'm part of this other group of people who all think this way and work that way, and that's part of who they are. So I think with age comes that maturity and understanding of how they work. But like, yes, with my cousin, their interests might not change. He's got a multitude of, he's not what we would have considered Asperger's. He's got a multitude of medical conditions. He's got XYY chromosome, if anyone knows what that is. So, there's a number of things coming into play. But yeah, he's still absolutely mad on trains and jigsaw puzzles.
Right.
At 23. But it's so intelligent. He's very low verbal. Just for a interesting anecdote of what students might be like. He's particularly low verbal. Can say maybe sort of 10 to 20 words of things that come up repeatedly in his daily life. Isn't able to look after his own sort of self-care issues. But if he lines up rows and rows of trains or cars on his bedroom floor all around the house, and my uncle will switch two of them around in the night, and in the morning Brandon will look at them and know and instantly find them and switch them back, like not being told.
Yeah.
And he can complete jigsaw puzzles without ever seeing the picture on the front. And you can mix up.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, my uncle's once mixed up 3 boxes of jigsaw puzzle pieces. He hasn't been able to see the picture of any of them, and he's made all 3 perfectly.
Oh, my goodness.
There's different ways of interpreting information and thinking. And it's important to get to know the student. I think it's a good example that you don't know what that student's going to be capable of just because they seem at first sort of sight or thought to be very low verbal or low, intelligence, but it's not really that. It can often be just presented in quite a different way, because I could never, ever do that, obviously. That's not...
It sounds like almost that savant kind of thing.
Yeah, there's obviously people in the world that have that, and that's not the majority.
Yeah. Anyway, we should focus, shouldn't we? We'll get sidetracked otherwise. All right, so I reckon we should start talking about some tactics and things, because I know that so many piano teachers have got students with ASD in their studios right now, and are hopefully coping really well, but I'm sure there's going to be some questions. What are some of your tips for keeping them focused, how to pace your lessons, how to make sure they're understanding what's going on? And another thing that I experienced too was dealing with attitude and tempers, particularly in teenage students, perhaps. Maybe that's a separate one we can get to later on, but just out of how to help them in their lessons. What are some of your tips?
I think the biggest thing, if we're looking at students with ASD and ADHD, I think and all your other students across the board, is to give really clear instructions.
Okay.
So like I was saying, with students misinterpreting information, a lot of times we can give instructions or think we're giving instructions, but we're more like sort of making a comment or something quite vague, like, oh, wouldn't it be better if we did this? Or isn't it about time you put that away? And no, I don't think it's about time, actually, Thembi. Just the way we phrase things, we might not realise, but it's not actually a very clear instruction. Mm-hmm. So to be very deliberate with your wording, to give clear instructions, avoid sort of verbal overload, like I'm probably giving everyone right now. And a big thing is, if you're repeating an instruction, like if a student hasn't followed what you've asked them to do, can you repeat it with exactly the same wording? That way the student, this is particularly students with ADHD, I've found, is more likely to respond to that being an instruction that they've been given twice or 3 times. If you've changed the wording, it could just be seen as a sort of separate thing that you're saying and not recognised. So it's quite a simple thing, but just to think about what you're saying. And if you're giving multiple instructions, could be, homework assignments or what you're teaching them within a piece, to pause and check between each instruction that they've understood it. or
And how
process
would you do that?
that. Oh, I just stop and ask them. So
Okay.
if you've asked them to do something, try not to give like a whole list. Oh, can you make sure that you remember the staccato in the right hand there? But then when we get here, you've got to hold that because remember it's a tie. And just a lot of students will cope with that. I talk a lot and have to work on that in my lessons.
We all do, don't we? Yeah.
I mean, you can very easily get to the end of a piece of students playing and you don't want to forget what you want to tell them, right? So you quickly go, okay, there's that, and then there's that, and then there's that. So just being aware if you do that, like I do, to really break things down and one thing at a time.
So perhaps if a student has played through a piece and there's some things to correct, maybe just ask for one correction.
Yeah, start with one thing at a time.
Okay, James, why don't we have a look? Let's be clear. So I would say, James, I'd like you to take note of the staccato in the left hand in the first line when you play that again. Something like that?
Absolutely. And then you go through that and get that working before overloading with more information. Okay. But it is hard, isn't it? You don't realize what you say, like, oh, let's have a look at that. Doesn't actually mean let's learn this or let's this.
That's right. But I think I'm a big believer in being quite open with instructions for other students because I like giving them a little bit of ownership in what happened. So asking a question to make them think about different ways they could interpret something, or so rather than say, why did you forget the staccato there? But have you taken note of all the different articulations in that first line? But that perhaps won't work so well. Do you think?
I think you can obviously asking questions. That sort of Socrates questioning method is such an awesome teaching tool. To not maybe completely throw it out the window, but to try and see how the student responds, and just be aware of not doing it all the time, like not being too vague and like you're saying, sometimes be very explicit. Okay, let's stop. Let's do the first line. We'll look at the staccato in the left hand. Can you play this again for me? And focusing on that thing. And I mean, definitely include questions, but try not to make them too vague.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, I think something like, what did you notice, or what, that's a bit vague, isn't it? What different kinds of articulation are there in these two bars would be fine, rather than sort of, oh, so what did you forget to do in the first line?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
What did I forget to do?
Yeah, that's right. I would have done it if I knew. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll put a link to, I wrote an article just a week or so ago about asking questions and the results I've had asking more questions. So I'll pop a link to that in the show notes. And for everyone listening to, the show notes for this episode will be at timtopham.com/episode 8. That's the number 8. Okay, so let's keep going with these ideas. I'm loving it. I'm learning heaps, Thembi. What about for a student that is kind of looking around and doesn't seem to be kind of focusing? How do you get them to reconnect?
So if a student's really not focusing on an activity, or the attention's gone, like they were focusing but it's gone, just move on, right? Let's just take a break. Let's do something else. So a big thing with students with ADHD particularly is what we call active response instruction. So teaching in a way that the student is actively involved and doing something different. So
hang on, active response
instruction, or active responsive instruction.
Okay.
So for a piano student, like I teach a gorgeous little 8-year-old boy who has ADHD. I've been teaching him for about 3 years, and we're not going to sit at the piano for 30 minutes. I mean, I'm sure there's so many teachers out there that would go, well, you wouldn't do that anyway. So most 8-year-old boys aren't going to want to do that.
Yep.
But sort of 5 to 7 minute chunks works quite well on average. Obviously, work with what the child is showing their attention with. But if you can break up your activities, so using little games, there are so many wonderful teaching blogs online where people are sharing their games and resources. For the Australians, the Samantha Coates Blitz series, which is fantastic. There's a book of musicianship games and a book of theory games, those Blitz books.
And that's at, I think, blitzbooks.com.au, I'm pretty sure. BLITZ.
Yeah. Right, yeah.
We'll put a link to that in the show notes, yeah.
By Samantha Coates. And those two books have really cool activities and games for more of the sort of exam level and up students. Like I've got a sort of one that's tailored AMEB, like our Australian exam system, for sort of grades 1 to 4, which is quite nice for resources for your more advanced students that still need a bit of movement. There are loads of really wonderful games out there for younger children. And it can also be really simple, just changing games you already have. Like if anyone's got sort of Ludo, Frustration, Trouble, those kind of board games. I just used the flashcards I've got from...
The music flashcards?
Like music flashcards with either with notes, intervals, general knowledge, signs, symbols, whatever you want to be working on, whatever you can grab quickly in your lesson when you need a 2-minute break. And we often play them with a board game. So the student we get to play the board game, but every time they roll the dice, they have to answer 2 questions, something like that. It's so simple, but it can really get them excited, and that they can lie on the floor, they can roll the dice, they can move the counter, their body's doing something.
Yes, that's not just sitting still.
Sitting and thinking.
Yeah.
So the idea of being able to move is quite...
And I imagine some piano teachers might be a bit worried about that, the parent sitting in the armchair behind and expecting a piano lesson, and there you are playing a board game on the floor.
I know there are some parents who are a little bit more traditionalist, but if you've got a parent who really wants you to teach their child and they're worried that, the child's got ADHD and they're not going to be able to concentrate, and are they going to be well behaved, and then you're up on the floor doing something that's got the kids' attention right back, most parents are actually going to be really thrilled.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't consider it a problem. I've had only a few sort of families where the parents are more traditionalist, sort of pushing things, but the kids love the games, and I'm just very careful to explain to the parents, look, we're doing this, we're also working hard, but then they're really enjoying it and they're going to be more focused for what we work on next at the piano. I've never had an issue.
So you could perhaps, I imagine technology, iPad apps might come into it as well?
Yeah, I use a lot of apps, but I try not to overuse them. Some parents can be pretty concerned that child's had enough screen time already and they don't need any more.
Definitely.
But little, rhythm games, note naming apps that you can play for 1 minute or 2 minutes can break up repetition of technical work or a piece but just I tend to break up my lessons, sort of do the pieces that they've worked on during the week first. They're generally excited to show me what they've done. Then we might get off the piano so that we're not learning something new straight away. And either they'll swap seats and we'll do some oral kind of activities, or we'll sit on the floor or lie on the floor and do a rhythm or a theory activity. Some kids are happy to stay at the piano and they really want to work on the next song, and we'll just go with that.
Of course, yeah.
But if you see their attention drifting, just to have lots of short little things you can do. And they don't take up a lot of space. I was presenting about teaching students with ADHD at the Cairns MTAQ weekend last year, and some teachers were saying they turned down teaching students with ADHD because they thought they'd need a lot of space for activities in their students.
Okay, yeah.
I think it's important to know you don't need space. The child doesn't need to sprint around, usually. Just changing
they
your...
just need to change location.
Yeah.
That's more important.
And, some students might need to roll over on the floor a little bit,
yeah. And that's okay.
Might need to spin around. Yeah, I've got a little girl. She doesn't have ADHD at all. She's just very clever but very bouncy. And I always let her, when she's worked on a new piece, she gets 30 seconds to do gymnastics on the floor.
Oh.
Right?
What a great idea.
Well, she's doing a back bend and then rolling on the floor and doing some kind of... They do yoga and stuff at school. And all right, back here, and she's fine.
That's good. It gets the blood flow going and all that too, I guess.
Absolutely. It can be pretty intense focus for any children, that sort of one-on-one piano lesson.
Absolutely, yeah.
Don't be afraid to let the child get off, and they're not going to go crazy. Like, you're not going to run wild and climb up the walls unless you let them.
That's right. Or encourage them to.
Along those lines, set really concrete guidelines for behaviour. Okay. Make sure the child knows what they are allowed to do, what they are not allowed to do, what they are expected to do and not. One of my students last year, I run piano camps in the holidays, and we finished an activity and his friends were packing it up and he'd got a green highlighter pen and gone, did not think he was being naughty, because he went, Miss Thembi, look, I can draw on the cupboard in the green pen. Because he was just showing me that the green pen showed up on my wooden sideboard. And I was like,
oh no.
Please don't draw on the cupboard in green pen, because I like it to like wood. And he's like, oh, okay, sorry, put it down. So just,
That is very calm and thoughtful and collective of you, I think. Very good.
well, students with ASD particularly, if they don't understand that facial expressions, gesture, inflection of voice, a lot of things to do with communication, you need to keep your reactions really calm and really predictable. There's no point in flaring up. It's not going to help anyone. Just, you can deal with that later. I've had plenty of Play-Doh to get out of the carpet, pen to get off the cupboard. Only happens once though. Just because I haven't thought to tell them not to draw on the cupboard with highlighter. It didn't come to mind. But you can be calm and predictable in your reactions. The child's behaviour is going to be more settled. Sure.
Yeah, and I think I experienced this with the student, so kind of teenage high-functioning ASD student who on a number, I taught him for a few years, and there was a few distinct times when he would come to lessons and it would all be great at the start, and then you just see this shift and he'd just start getting really, really tense and angry, just genuinely angry. And it was really hard for me to not take it personally. It's like, what have I done? Like, why are you angry with me? And it could have been something that happened earlier in the day. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah. So my tactic was just to stay calm and just move on to a different piece or do something different.
Do something else.
Is that the right thing to do? I don't know.
I think so. I mean, it's going to be different for every student again, but that sounds like it worked. But definitely stay calm and don't be insulted if the student, seems to react in a strange way to what you're doing. It's often, like you said, not anything to do with you. And if don't be sort of insulted by a lack of empathy. If you're upset about something and the student doesn't show any sort of acknowledgement of that, like you're upset that they haven't done something, or you're upset because something that's happened during your day and it's spilling over into your teaching, that student doesn't necessarily understand that tears mean that you're upset, that the way that your face looks or the way that your body is moving indicates any particular emotion or feeling. We do a lot of work with young children with ASD on understanding facial expressions and body language, and teaching them this means this and this means this, and this person probably is feeling like this, and things that they don't understand. So just don't be insulted. For sure. Just roll with it.
Right, no, you've got to be flexible, don't you? All right, so let's just go. I just want to recap some of those key tips because I want to pop them in the show notes as a list so that people in their car and things don't have to grab some paper. So
I can give you a list if you'd like.
Oh, that'd be great. But just to summarise, some of those key ones were to be really clear with your instructions. Clear, short, straightforward instructions.
Statements, yeah. No.
Keeping things mixed up, so mix up activities.
Yep.
And that was equally for ASD students as ADHD.
Yeah,
it depends on them, I guess.
Depends on the student, but it's definitely for students with ADHD, with the inattention or the hyperactivity, to keep things changed. But I tend to just do that with all my students now because I find it gets a better response from what we call the typical children who don't have a diagnosed learning disorder. I still find that they learn much better when the lesson's a bit mixed up like that.
I tend to agree, yeah.
So just see how it goes with the individual child. But what is it with ASD? Just having a look at what I wrote down. With their repetitive routines, I didn't mention so much that, keep as well as your reactions, keep your environment predictable. It might seem strange, but if you're going to paint a wall or move the piano or get a new table, that could throw that student off for the whole next lesson.
Right, okay.
So let them know, next time you come, this wall's going to be blue. All right, let's think about what it might look like. Or the piano's going to be over here. So when you come in, you're going to walk over here and we're going to sit on this side of the room. You can just prepare them for any kind of change. That goes for concerts, recitals, exams, of course, if that's what you're doing, group classes, anything. If you just explain the situation in advance, you're more likely to avoid any.
That's
problem.
Such a great tip. I would never have thought of doing that. That's really good.
And you don't think about it because most children aren't going to have an issue with it. But as soon as one does, you got to remember it for next time.
Great tip. Thank you.
And with the sensory overload and sensitivity, be aware of what that student likes. There's really simple things for students that don't like noise. This just comes from my classroom teaching background. The dragging of the metal chairs along the classroom floors is really like getting a tennis ball. You slit the tennis ball open in one point and you pop the tennis ball over the bottom of the chair legs, the four legs.
Yeah.
That chair doesn't make any noise on the floor anymore.
Okay.
If you've got that sort of thing in your studio space. I have chairs with metal legs on a wooden floor, and I mean that's just a really easy way around it.
Yeah, perfect.
But it could be noise, it could be light. My piano studio is at the front of my house and opens up onto the window opens out onto the street. So people walking past with dogs or children or kids on the way home from school, that's super distracting. If you can either move away from that area and do something, my desk faces the other way for my table for students to do theory and stuff, or we sit on the floor and face the other way, or you can close the blinds. Just be aware, like distractions can be amplified.
Yes.
So if you can do really little changes to reduce them, it's good. And if a student doesn't like a colour or is sensitive to smell, then to be aware of what you're wearing, what you've got on. And
what perfume or whatever you're wearing, or what meal you're cooking in your kitchen.
Less perfume, Tim. And students that have sort of tactile sensitivity might want their own set of stationery for doing theory, to have their own pencils and rubbers that they're comfortable with. The grip might seem a little thing, but the grip of a new pen or a pencil can really feel horrible.
Right.
So just if that's an issue, then the kids can just bring their own, or you can have a separate set for them that no one else uses. That sort of little thing. But just, predictable routine. Routine, that's a big one, sorry.
So when they come into a lesson, they know this is the normal order of things?
Absolutely. And you can even write it down.
Yeah.
In classrooms, a lot of kids will have written down what the activities are that day, so they know what comes next with little pictures. I've done one up. I normally show it in my presentations where we might start with an activity from your sight reading book, then we'll review the pieces, then we'll play a game, then we'll learn a new piece, then we'll do a listening activity, then it's time to pack up and go home. And students that have good reading skills, you can, write that list out for them and just have it up near the piano when they come in, or you can use pictures. Just the student often really likes a routine to follow and then not thrown off by what comes next. So
yeah, I found that particularly.
ADHD, obviously. So
sorry, say that again.
It's more for students with ASD.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I found exactly the same thing. If you can stick to a similar routine, they're just instantly at ease, aren't they? They're just comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. They feel much more comfortable.
Yeah.
Which is obviously what you want. So, I think that's mostly, careful with your language. Don't force the students to make eye contact. Predictable environment, and don't stop any of those self-soothing behaviours. The child is...
The hand movements or...
Well, one of the boys I teach that sucks the collar of his shirt, I didn't realise that's what that was, because I hadn't encountered that personally as a self-soothing thing, and I initially sort of went, I better not do that. Mum might not want you to eat your,
eat your collar.
To come home all wet, and then I sort of clicked into what he was doing and oops.
Yeah.
I mean, but hopefully parents can tell you as well what their child likes and doesn't like. This thing. You mentioned the behaviour, sort of like angry behaviour or disruptive behaviour.
Perhaps might be more for older students. I'm not sure, but that's my experience.
In piano teaching, I haven't had any issues with students, but it's just obviously the students that you have. I definitely have students in a classroom. Had a little girl in my grade 1 class with ASD who would throw chairs when she got upset, which is obviously not great in a classroom.
No, gosh.
6-year-olds don't have great aim. But the school was really on board with her mum. And if the child got very disruptive like that, and she had her own, space that she could sit in and read a book, and that was her sort of, not time out, but it wasn't a punishment. It was just, okay, we'll sit over here, get calm down, read this or play this game, something that she was really familiar with. But if she didn't calm down, the mum would come and collect her. And it was simply, there are 30 children in the class, and if one of them is going to throw chairs and we can't calm her down,
she can't be around the other students. It's dangerous.
In general, she would be there and be learning, but that sort of issue could come up. I would suggest, if that's an issue, especially with younger children, to have the parents wait just outside in the car. If that is going to become a big problem and you don't know the child well enough to help calm them down or help re-establish comfortable behaviour, then to really have the parents on board. Either they can come in and help, or they can just remove the child for a short period. Maybe it's 2 minutes sitting outside and then coming back in refocused, or maybe that's the end of the lesson for the day. Just being more flexible.
That's a great tip, particularly if you're just starting a new student with a known
learning
disorder. Yeah.
I mean, it's not sort of really for your protection as such. It's just making sure the child is comfortable and learning, and that the parents are comfortable leaving them. Obviously, parents might be quite concerned about leaving their child with a stranger, not knowing how the child's going to react to things, so they might want to stay anyway.
Have you experienced do parents of students with known learning disorders tend to want to stay in lessons, and is that a good thing, or does it depend on the student?
Definitely depends on the student and the family. I'd say most of mine don't stay. Okay. Just sort of convenience, and the couple of boys with ADHD, their parents definitely don't stay, and the kids are more focused when it's just me and them.
Sure.
Easier to concentrate, no parent to kind of look back on and talk to or smile at or whatever. So that can be better. But I mean, students with ASD, you might find that they're more comfortable staying, and that the student is more comfortable if they stay. And that's obviously your big goal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's completely depends on the student.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. See, and teach the parents, really form a good relationship with the parents, and
yeah. Yeah, no, it's so important, and I think piano teachers on the whole are actually really good at communicating with parents and keeping in touch. I mean, we're lucky, unlike classroom teachers, we can actually stay in close contact. So yeah, we're a step ahead there.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. As piano teachers, compared to classroom teachers, you have the ability to help that child develop their self-esteem as well. A lot of kids with behavioural problems are seen as the naughty child at school, just because they're always acting out against what the rest of the class is doing, or they get the sort of label as being the naughty child, and they then start to take on that label as part of their personality, a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. But they can consider themselves the naughty child, and that can be quite damaging. So I tend to think we're in a unique position. We work with them one-on-one. There's no 29 other children to focus on. You can do what you really need to do for that student and make them see that they are a capable student. They are a good learner. They are a good listener. They can do the right thing. They can progress and succeed. And if you really, really acknowledge that, you can transform that child's opinion of themselves, and that might even transition into their schoolwork.
Yeah.
So you don't know what a profound impact you can have when you've got that one-on-one chance to work with the student and improve their self-esteem. I think is a thing that we can do that could really transform that child's thought process of themselves, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely, yeah. And for that matter, it goes for any of our students, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, we all know that a lot of music students can be kind of the reserved type and that sort of thing. So, we're very lucky and privileged to be able to work one-on-one with all these young people.
Absolutely.
And adults for that matter. So, good. Yeah. All right. Last couple of questions, because we're going to finish up in just a minute. If one of the people listening has a student with them and they think that their student might have ADHD or ASD, but the parents haven't mentioned it and, there's been no discussion about it, can they or should they approach the parents and say, have you thought about having, young Harry or whoever it is tested, or just leave it, or what's your...
I'd be very careful about sort of saying to parents that you think the child may have a specific learning disorder and that they should be tested because it could be seriously like offense taken to that by parents who might know that all these things are happening but be very sensitive to it and feel a bit sort of attacked. Definitely if there are issues, I would approach the parent and talk to them, but not from the point of view of getting them diagnosed, just addressing the exact concerns that you're having. And so if the student is really struggling with their inattention sort of behavior, just, talk about, I've noticed that they're very forgetful and struggling with organizing themselves and listening. Have you found anything that works at home that I could help, that you could let me know and would help me? Or I found that this really works. I just wanted to let you know in case it would help him at school. Go from the very understanding, I want to help point of view, not, I think there's something wrong with your child. Sort of attacking. Obviously, no one would say that in that way, but it could be taken in that way.
Absolutely, yeah.
If you start to raise those, concerns just from you want to help them, that might develop a better relationship, and it might lead to the parent sort of confiding in you and asking your advice. You don't know. A lot of students with ASD will have been diagnosed quite young though, because it's sort of that developmental disorder. Students are reaching developmental milestones regarding speech, fine motor control, gross motor control, and self-care. And that's all, from sort of the age of 2 and up, you generally quite recognize those milestones not being met. ADHD typically more diagnosed at a school age, because especially when they're required to sit still and concentrate for longer periods of time. And maybe just, you could always suggest that, or ask if there's anything that teachers have said at school as well that you might be able to use, and just get the parents thinking about it. Definitely go from the point of view of you want to help and what can they offer to help, ideas to help you teach them better. I think it'll be better received. Just tread carefully.
Yeah, no, great tips, Thembi. Thank you so much. And I think too, it's probably worth mentioning. We're talking about ADHD, and there's a lot of questions about why students have it and why students in different countries have it and things like that. So we're not. I mean, that's another whole podcast. Probably we're not going to talk about that right now. But there's plenty of research and articles about it. All we're trying to do here is just give you tips for students who do present with those behavioural issues,
absolutely.
I guess. Yeah. Now, any online resources that you could lead us or lead teachers to for more information? Have you got any recommendations, or perhaps we could add them to the show notes?
I might have a think and add them to show notes for you. I'd have to have a look up things that I just don't know them off the top of my head that I'd look to for information. But in terms of games, there are wonderful piano teaching blogs out there. I'm sure some of them you've probably spoken to people in your podcast, like Joy Marin and Diane Heidi and Susan Paradis, all have great ideas and things you can take.
They were the 3 that I was thinking of, actually. So we'll put links to them: Diane Heidi, Joy Marin, and Susan Paradis.
There's others that I've definitely used games from. I might just have to look them up for you.
If you think of any, we'll pop them in the notes.
Yeah. Good way to use up your non-contact teaching time. Just do a little bit of research, find some cool things. You'll have more fun teaching anyway.
Absolutely, yeah.
Find something new, and your other students will enjoy it as well.
So is there anything we've missed to sum up that you were itching to say that we haven't covered?
No, just sort of that there are obviously other learning disorders as well, that there's a big difference between these conditions and a student who's a slow learner or is having trouble with a certain aspect. These are diagnosed medical conditions.
The ones we're talking about are diagnosed medical conditions.
Absolutely. But then there are others. A student that's struggling with a certain thing that you're teaching doesn't mean that, they've probably got ADHD because they can't concentrate on this. It might be that they're struggling with that. So I'm sure everyone knows about dyslexia, like problems with reading. Then there's dyscalculia, problems with maths, dysgraphia, handwriting, dysphasia, use of language, dyspraxia, fine motor skills, and there's auditory processing disorders, visual processing disorders. There's so many things to consider that a student might be struggling with something, and just get on board with the parents and see what they already know from the school. Or
and ultimately, it's just about how we tailor our individual teaching, isn't it?
Yeah.
To suit each student. And we've all got students who are incredibly quick to learn things. They're great memorizers, but shocking sight readers, or they just take months and months to learn one piece. And that's okay. That's their pace.
And like you say, with those students, you work to their individual needs. You know that student really needs a lot of work on sight reading, and they need extra help with this, but they're great at memorizing, that sort of thing. And treat, students that come to you, the parents are saying they've got a diagnosis of ADHD, ASD, dyslexia, anything, treat them exactly the same way. Figure out what they need, work with that, and just, teach them the way you would teach any other student, by working to their needs and just being flexible.
That's what it's all about.
It's your job interesting.
That's right. Okay, so how can teachers find you, Thembi, if they want to get in touch or read anything or ask you any questions?
Yeah, so my website is www.thembishears.com.au. Hopefully
we'll put a link to that in the show notes too.
So everyone knows how to spell my name. Yep. Creative parenting at its finest.
I like it.
Mom and Dad. My contact details are up there on my website. I'm very happy to respond to emails if anyone has specific questions I might be able to help with. Again, not a psychiatrist.
Or a doctor,
any kind of doctor. I just and I don't have experience I'm not an expert in the field per se. I've just taken an interest in it. I have studied it within my bachelor degree, but I'm by no means the ultimate expert on the topic. Just I'll share what I do know.
Yeah.
And I'm sure
I've
wonderful resources out there.
I've learned stacks from you today, Thembi. It's been great fun. Thank you so much for chatting with us. And so the show notes for this episode will be at timtopham.com/episode 8. As usual, at the end of the podcast show notes, there's a spot for questions too. So would you be happy if people leave questions there to jump in and answer them?
Absolutely, no problem.
That would be really good, because I have a feeling this will definitely have some questions come up from teachers who are right in the thick of it and going, oh my God, what do I do? Give me some help.
Yeah, for sure. No, be very happy to do that.
Brilliant stuff. All right. Well, I'll let you get back to sunny Queensland and enjoy your day. And can I thank everyone so much for following and listening and subscribing to this podcast. It's really great to read so many positive reviews. And if you do get a spare couple of minutes, I would love for you to leave a review on iTunes. And the link to do that is actually at the top of my webpage. You can go to podcasts and there's a menu link to leave a review. It shows you exactly how to do it. If you can do that, it would be great. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thanks, Thembi. Farewell.
All right. Thanks so much, Tim.
Thank you very much. Bye.